Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Brexit has officially hit an impasse. Theresa May's Brexit deal was overwhelmingly defeated in the UK Parliament. Yet she narrowly won a no-confidence motion tabled right after the Brexit vote she lost by a historic margin. What does all that mean for Brexit? Opposition parties have asked for guarantees that a no-deal Brexit be ruled out for discussions to move forward with the May government. Europe has asked for clarity. To discuss all of that a bit further, we're now joined by our esteemed guest, Mr. Yanis Kotsoumides, who is a European affairs analyst, who's joining us now from Athens. And we're also joined by Mr. Jonathan Fryer, who is the Liberal Democrats' Brexit spokesperson for London, and he is joining us from London itself. Thank you both for joining us. Yanis, I'd like to start with you, if I may. What do you think Europe is feeling at this point in time with this confusion, seemingly, that we're seeing coming out of the UK?
Well, I think there is anxiety in European capitals because no one really knows what will eventually happen in Westminster with all this mess. There are some signals in the last few hours that Mrs. May might be willing to ask for an extension of the Article 50 exit from the European Union. I think this is the most positive way to approach right now, because there is no real majority for any solution, even for a second referendum, which I think would be the best way out of this mess.
And Jonathan, do you think Article 50 should be extended, that there should be, that she should approach Brussels and ask for that extension?
I think she should indeed, because basically the clock is running down. We've only got more than about 30, less than 40 working days in Parliament before Britain is due to leave the European Union. And there's a clear majority in Parliament as well as in the public to avoid a so-called no-deal Brexit, in other words, to crash out of the European Union without a deal. And as Yanis says, there is no agreement about what sort of deal would be possible. And let's remind ourselves the EU has said they're not going to renegotiate the package that's already been put down. So I think extending Article 50, the suggestion has been until July, would be a very good way forward to give more time for the British Parliament to work out what exactly it is that it wants. Mrs. May is going to come back to Parliament on Monday and share with the Parliament the discussions she's having over the weekend with other party leaders. So we'll see if something constructive comes for that. But I'd also agree with Yanis that actually a people's vote or a referendum is the obvious way forward out of this impasse.
Okay, so Yanis, if we, in the hypothetical situation, remain with the current situation, and as Jonathan there said, the EU is not really going to renegotiate the package on the table right now, we're sort of just at a permanent stalemate, aren't we?
Well, the dangerous part of the equation is that there is right now no legal way to block no-deal Brexit. There needs to be a new bill or an amendment that will that will take off the table the no-deal option. This is the most dangerous part of the equation right now. On the other hand, I think Mrs. May needs to be more realistic and start discussing other options as well. There have been discussions about a Norway Plus possible deal, also an EFTA deal, and also the no Brexit at all. These all need to be discussed again with calm, with no furious attacks between the MPs or the populist press that is attacking everyone that is for a reasonable solution to this impasse.
So Jonathan, what do you make of that, though? Because at this point in time, I imagine if Theresa May were to accept that a second referendum should occur, and I know I've brought this up with you in an earlier discussion as well, Jonathan, but then concerns are raised about what does that mean for that first Brexit referendum. Are we now saying that the people's vote that was held at that point in time is not to be respected?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think the first referendum has been misrepresented in many ways. It was quite clear from the legislation it was an advisory vote, basically asking the British people, do you wish to stay in the European Union or to leave? And a narrow majority voted leave. But it didn't ask them anything at all about what sort of deal they would accept. And I think it's absolutely logical that there is a new vote which would not ask that simplistic binary question again. It would say, this is the deal that has been agreed. Do you accept this, or would you prefer to remain in the EU? And I personally, and the Liberal Democrat Party, believe that this is the best way forward. But I agree absolutely with Yanis. More urgent at the moment is to get a bill through Parliament to stop no deal, because at the moment that is the default position. If there is no agreement or no bill to change the law as it stands, the withdrawal agreement, no deal is the default position.
And why do you think, Jonathan, that Theresa May has not yet signed on to that guarantee that there be a no deal in this case?
She has been trying all along to appease different wings of her own Conservative Party. And there is a substantial group of people on the right wing of the party who actually want no deal. They believe that it would be good for Britain's long-term future to crash out of the European Union and to go on to World Trade Organization rules, so that Britain would in principle be free to set its own tariffs, its own terms, and to negotiate deals with other countries around the world outside of the framework of EU agreements. Now, most of the rest of the Conservative MPs think that is completely crazy, and that this would do huge damage to various sectors of the UK economy, not least the car industry, which depends on the free flow of parts between different EU countries, and farmers as well, who are really alarmed about what this could mean.
Okay, so yeah, Michel Barnier obviously made a statement on this situation as well, and he brought up some interesting things which I wanted to bring to you as well. He said that if the UK were to soften its stances on its opposition, for example, to remaining within the EU's customs union, that the EU in that case would then in fact be open to more discussions and possible renegotiation, on specific points. Do you think that the EU also then, Yanis, realizes that a no-deal scenario would be bad for it and that it needs to be a bit more compromising than it's publicly shown?
Of course, everyone in the EU realizes that a no-deal Brexit damages the UK, but also damages many countries in the EU as well, and damages the image of the EU. So in Brussels and in main European capitals, they want to avoid this outcome. I think Mr. Barnier hinted that there could be a deal in the freedom of movement in case the UK is willing to accept a customs union agreement. And I think that is the most logical case. And I think this is what Mrs. May needs to pursue right now, a customs union with some sort of a regulated freedom of movement or some new arrangement for the freedom of movement, in order to assure the British public that the old regime of the EU citizens coming over to the UK and seeking jobs will not continue. I think this is the most logical way not to make big rifts within the British society and also maintain the commerce and the business of the British economy.
Okay, we're going to a very short break, and we'll be back right after that break with more discussion on Brexit and where it currently stands. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue talking about the latest when it comes to Brexit. Of course, a lot has been happening in these days. We're joined now by Jonathan Fryer, Liberal Democrats Brexit spokesperson for London. He's joining us from London itself. We're now joined also by Ms. Emma D'Souza, who is a citizen rights campaigner, and she's joining us from Belfast. She's also been campaigning for the protection of the Good Friday Agreement. She joins us live now via Skype, I believe. And we're also joined by Mr. Quentin Peel, who is an associate fellow, joining us from London. He's attached to the Europe program at Chatham House as well, and he is a former foreign editor of the Financial Times. I'd like to appreciate, of course, all of our guests for joining us. Emma, I'd like to start with you, if I may. And for many of us, Emma, outside of the UK as a whole, the Good Friday Agreement is a bit of a maze to understand. Just put into context for us why that's so important when it comes to the discussion of Brexit.
Well, I mean, the Good Friday Agreement is a peacekeeping treaty between two sovereign countries that did stabilize the situation in Northern Ireland, and it protects the rights of the people here, equality between the two societies. Now, Brexit is a risk to that. It's a risk to the border, where 2 million crossings are made every single month here. And it's a risk to that treaty that brought peace. So I think that is the importance of the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay, I believe Yanis is still with us. Yanis Kotsum, European Affairs Analyst, is still with us from Athens. Yanis, I wanted to ask you also about this, the fact that we've been talking about this backstop between Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, that is, and Northern Ireland. That's been a very touchy issue, a very important issue when it comes to these discussions. What is your point of view about how Europe views that? Obviously, at least publicly, both the UK and the EU have said they do not want a hard border.
Well, I think there is a misunderstanding in the UK about how the EU sees the backstop. EU would be happy if there was no problem in Ireland, and if the Irish people would accept a border, but this is not happening. It would create a very serious rift within the Irish society, and it would endanger the peace in Ireland. So EU needs to respect the rights of the Irish people, and Ireland has been a great member of the European Union, a proud member, and all EU should try to find a solution in this very delicate situation and respect the rights of the Irish citizens.
Okay, Emma, I'm going to back in. Jonathan, I'm going to ask you to just hold on to your thoughts. I will get to you for a reaction. But Emma, what do you think should happen right now when it comes to this discussion about Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement? What should happen going forward? Because there is obviously at this point in time no guarantee that a no-deal Brexit will not occur. May has not yet put that on the table to rule that out. What would a no-deal Brexit, Emma, mean for this specific case?
I mean, a no-deal Brexit threatens peace in Northern Ireland. That's the reality. And I think that a fundamental problem with Brexit from the outset was that there wasn't much thought given to the Good Friday Agreement and the complexities that were going to arise with the border. The backstop is essential, and the backstop can't go. So seeing so many people, politicians in Westminster discussing removing a backstop or there being no need for a backstop, from someone in Northern Ireland, this is deeply, deeply concerning for everybody in our society, and we're very worried about what that could mean.
So that, Emma, just to are you saying that if there was to be a no-deal Brexit and a hard border brought in, would that mean violence, civil unrest? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, I would say civil unrest, definitely. But on top of that, I think a no-deal Brexit and the idea of a hard border will bring the discussion of a united Ireland to the forefront of people's mind. I mean, you have to remember the people in Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU by 56%. They did not choose to leave. Now, if there was another referendum, that could potentially be an even higher number.
Okay, so Jonathan, been hearing there from our guest talking about this issue of Ireland and Northern Ireland. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that the Conservative government basically kept rather like an ostrich with its head in the sand for 3 years, really, about the whole issue of Ireland. I debated with the then Minister for Northern Ireland, Theresa Villiers, during the 2016 referendum campaign, and she denied flatly there was any problem whatsoever and that things would be just the same as normal if we left the European Union and there would be no problem. But that is clearly not the case. There is a very real risk that the great benefits of the Good Friday Agreement could be undone. But there is almost an irreconcilable problem at the moment, because there are those who want to see no difference between the the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, and those who wish to see no difference between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. In other words, the Democratic Unionist Party, which is propping up Mrs. May's government. Now, within the EU, those things can be reconciled, but leaving the EU does create a problem, because for the Irish situation to remain fairly stable, Northern Ireland does have to be treated a little differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. And there was talk at one stage of a sort of theoretical border down the Irish Sea between the island of Ireland and the United Kingdom, which for the DUP is completely unacceptable. So it's a very intractable problem. And as I say, the only logical way of solving it is for Britain to stay in the EU.
Okay, and yeah, you know, one of the things that has always come up when we're talking about Brexit is why did all of this occur to begin with? You know very well, Yanis, the complaints on the side of those who support even a hard Brexit is that the EU and the way it's structured, it threatens the sovereignty of individual member states. How do you feel about those accusations? Do you think that the EU has taken lesson from this situation and possibly will be reforming itself?
I think the outcome of the Brexit referendum has been a shock for the European leadership. They understand that besides all the nasty campaigns of the Brexiteers and possible also interference of foreign countries in the campaign, there were real reasons behind why so many British people decided to leave the EU. The deindustrialization of the northern part of the Britain was a main factor for many people blaming the EU for this kind of situation. Also, the mass migration of European citizens to the UK created a social problem, which the EU had to see and protect the integrity of the British society as well, because the EU needs to protect societies from overreactions of freedoms. So there is talk right now in the next few months about how to correct some reforms and how to make a new approach to the European Union in the next few months. On May 9th, there will be a summit in Romania of the EU 27 to decide how to proceed in the next years. Maybe it could be an opportunity also to have some new arrangements and to talk to the UK and say, look, we're ready to reform, we're ready to listen to you, and do reconsider remaining in the EU.
But Yanis, to be fair, you know, many people would argue that with the current leadership that the EU has, it hasn't shown a lot of flexibility, has it, when it comes to the EU structure? Or maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can correct me on that point, but many people have argued that the likes of Juncker and Tusk and others, I can list all the names really, are very much stuck in their ways when it comes to the European Union, and that is sort of the whole issue here.
Look, there are 3 or 4 different opinions right now, general opinions in the EU on how to proceed in the future. There is the more federal approach, let's say federal, that is called by Mr. Macron and other southern leaders. There is the Northern League, the Hanseatic League, which are countries that are very close to the British way of thinking. And also the Eastern countries, Eastern European countries. So there's not a single unitary opinion of how to proceed. And if the UK would accept renegotiating or talking again, it could find new partners and create a new consensus within the EU. But to give a clear picture of how the negotiations proceeded, Mr. Tusk and Mr. Juncker had to protect the European treaties. Yeah. They could not do favors to the UK. It was out of the question from the beginning.
Okay, so Emma, I wanted to bring you back in and ask you, Emma, your point of view on the EU and its structure. And I'm sure you've heard of all the criticisms that I, for example, put to Yanis there. Do you think that there are some legitimate concerns there about how the EU is structured? And are you hoping that those will be reformed possibly if the UK were to, hypothetically, of course, stay within the EU somehow?
I mean, I think there's always room within any organization or country for reform that can improve things. But as to the structure of the EU at present, I don't personally think that there is much wrong with the current place where we are. I think the Brexit vote wasn't necessarily based on the four freedoms that are at the core of the EU. I think it was more of a domestic problem where the people of the UK were not being felt like they were being heard by their government. And I think the position that the EU leaders have taken is one that is to be expected. There are 27 member states that need to be protected here. It's not about the UK, it's about those countries as well.
But to be fair, though, Emma, if I may push you on that point, if we're looking across the EU, there seems to be a movement, isn't there, of criticism and of far-right parties and, populist parties gaining momentum, again, on a more anti-EU platform. That's not happening in a vacuum, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to that point of I think that reform is a good thing and should be looked at in any country, in any state, in any organization. But I think the wave of what's happening across Europe could be put down more to a similar issue where people are not being heard by their particular government and domestic issues are not being fulfilled. And
Jonathan, do you agree? Do you think that it's a question of the fact that the British people felt like they weren't being heard by their own government, that possibly they then voted for Brexit?
I think we have to acknowledge that the 17 million people who voted to leave did not all have the same thing in mind when they voted. Some genuinely wanted to leave the EU, but many did indeed vote as a protest against the Conservative government of the then Prime Minister David Cameron, protested about the domination of London over the rest of the country. There were all sorts of issues at play. But if I could pick up the point about reform, I think we are at a very interesting point at the moment. There'll be European elections in May for the new European Parliament, and Jean-Claude Juncker and other commissioners will have the end of their term. And so it's a really good moment for discussions about the future. But I'd also like to pick up the point about Europe's popularity, because the Eurostat opinion polls have been very clear in recent months. Since Britain voted for Brexit, support for the European Union has gone up in all of the member states, not only in the Republic of Ireland, but right across the European Union, because they realise that Britain is making a huge mistake.
Quentin is also joining us now. He's an associate fellow joining us from London. He's with the Europe program at Chatham House. Quentin, thanks for joining us. What do you make of that point, Quentin, if you heard it, that Jonathan there made about the Eurostat and the fact that opinions polls are now saying that Europe is actually more popular now than it's been before? Do you think that Brexit has taught a lesson possibly to not only British people but also to Europeans about possibly how important Europe is, and secondly, how tough Brexit really would be?
Yes, I think there has been something of a Brexit shock. I mean, even in countries like France and Denmark, you've seen a pickup in support for the EU. Having said that, the other thing Jonathan was talking about, that there are European elections due in May, I think there is extraordinary nervousness right across the European Union that there will be a big populist vote. And that will make governance of the European Union more difficult. Because if you've got a very large bloc in the European Parliament who actually don't want the thing to work, that makes life difficult. So Brexit feeds into that, because if the Brexit process drags on with the British being completely unable to reach any decision about what they're going to do, that may complicate the European elections. And some people fear it may increase the populist vote. Others think, well, actually, no, it won't. It'll show everybody that to try and actually pull out of the European Union is crazy.
Okay, and on that point, then I wanted to ask you, because, when Brexit occurred and when that referendum occurred as well in the UK, many people said, and going forward, it seemed like really in the process of negotiations that the EU was trying to almost make a point, wasn't it? And again, this is just hypothetical, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it wanted to set a precedent really almost for all these other movements across Europe to show them really how tough it is to leave the European Union structure, A, and B, that the EU really actually genuinely has benefits for all of its member states. Is that the correct way to frame this situation?
I think not entirely. I think let's begin at the beginning. The initiative for all of this came from Britain. This was a British vote to leave. The European Union begged us not to, said, please don't do it. We don't want to have it. This is a crazy thing to do. It'll be incredibly difficult to do. So that's the starting point. The Brits having decided, no, we're going ahead with this, but Theresa May triggering her Article 50 without even having worked out what she wanted, the European Union said, right, well, we are a body of law, and therefore we've got to disentangle this law. That's a very complicated process, but that's where we begin from. And I think there's been a misunderstanding on the two sides right from the start. The British tend to think that this is all, if you like, just a political exercise. It can all be politically fudged. We can wing it, basically. The British always muddle through. And the Europeans are saying, actually, no, this all based on international treaties. It has to be done in a very legal way as well as a manageable way. And I think that they've been talking past each other for a lot of the time, which is why the whole exercise has been so complicated. Pascal Lamy, the former Director General of the World Trade Organization, put it beautifully a couple of years ago. He said, you're trying to take an egg out of the omelette. It will cost the egg and it'll cost the omelette.
Okay, so let me go to Emma, if I may, because I know that you work with immigration and you're also a citizens' right campaigner, pardon me. One of the issues, Emma, that came up during the Brexit campaign itself was concerns about EU migration into the UK specifically, and vice versa even, really, but more so that way. Do you think that those concerns were well-founded? Is that something that you feel needs to be addressed?
I think that those concerns were, fuel was put into the fire of those concerns during the Brexit campaign, and people do have valid concerns about immigration and people coming in, but it wasn't helped in the Brexit debate. I think that the people that wanted to leave tapped into that and exaggerated the reality that we do have in the United Kingdom. In Northern Ireland, EU migration is essential because we're both EU and UK citizens, and Brexit is then posing a risk to that status. So post-Brexit, Irish passport holders, which we're entitled to all be, will be classed as EU citizens, but will have secondary rights. We will not have the same rights as our partners across the border. On the other side of that, people who hold only British passports in Northern Ireland will not have any EU rights. And that in itself is a breach of the Good Friday Agreement, which states that there can't be any different treatment between the two communities. So in terms of immigration and migration and EU rights, very complex. But I think that was not a very good argument in the initial stage.
And Jonathan, what do you make of those concerns about migration, specifically from EU countries into the UK, for example? I know that there had been violence, for example, towards Polish migrants in the UK, for example, during the campaign, and I believe after as well. Do you think that those concerns overall were well-founded? Was that a legitimate concern?
I think part of the problem was that the British government, it was then a Labour government in 2004, when 8 formerly communist states of Central and Eastern Europe joined the European Union, opened the doors and said, fine, there can be freedom of movement for your citizens, unlike Germany, for example, and France, who all put a limit of a few years where people had to wait. So up to 1 million Poles moved to Britain. And indeed, they've filled a gap in the labour market, in farming, in industry, in social care, all sorts of things. But undoubtedly, there was a negative reaction from some communities, particularly outside London, to this sudden influx of people speaking a language nobody could understand, behaving in ways which were unusual from the local people's point of view. But I think we have to acknowledge that the violence we've seen, and it's limited numbers, is the work of racists. And these are not representative of the British public.
Emma, tell us about your thoughts in the coming days, where you're hoping to see occur? Because, the Prime Minister has seemingly reached out a hand to the opposition party saying, let's talk. At this point in time, Labour has said we're not going to talk until a no-deal Brexit is ruled out completely. What do you think is going to happen, and what are you hoping to happen?
I think that Jeremy Corbyn will reconsider, and he should speak with Theresa May on these issues. I'll be interested to see what the Bowles Amendment brings about on Monday. But what I think needs to happen is there has to be a vote given back to the people. It is clear that there is no consensus within Parliament for any decisions, and the people should have a say in the final deal, because at the end of the day, when Brexit came about, nobody really knew what the ramifications were going to be. So I think it is right that the people should be able to decide.
Very well. We'll leave the final word. We, of course, appreciate all of our guests and their time, of course, their insight and analysis on this important topic of Brexit. Let me start from the bottom and thank all of our guests. We're joined by Quentin Peel, Associate Fellow, joining us from London. He's attached to the Europe program at Chatham House and is former foreign editor of the Financial Times as well. We were joined there by Ms. Emma D'Souza, citizen rights campaigner, and she's been campaigning for the protection of the Good Friday Agreement. She was speaking to us from Belfast. We were also joined by Mr. Jonathan Fryer, Liberal Democrats' Brexit spokesperson for London. He was joining us from the British capital. And from Athens, we were joined by Mr. Yanis Kotsouminis, European Affairs Analyst. And now, viewers, as all of our guests have spoken about, it is time, seemingly at least, to give the voice back to the British people. They did speak in that first referendum there, but there are concerns about how that narrative had been constructed about the European Union in that first referendum and how it occurred. Maybe it is time to give it back to the people and ask them whether or not they agree with the current package deal that is on the table as negotiated by Prime Minister Theresa May's government and the European Union. The next coming days are, of course, vital as May attempts to at least start discussions with all the opposition parties that make up UK politics. We will, of course, wait and see how all of that works out, especially, of course, that very sensitive issue about Ireland and Northern Ireland and a backstop versus hard border there. We'll keep a close eye on that. Don't go anywhere, though. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Thank you very much for staying with us here in The Scope, viewers. In this segment, we're going to discuss Marzieh Hashemi, born Melanie Franklin, who is an American journalist, documentary filmmaker, and news anchor with Iran's Press TV. On a trip back home to the United States to film a documentary about Black Lives Matter and to visit her family, including an ailing brother, she was detained by the FBI on Sunday. Questions are being asked about her continuing detention without charge. To discuss that a bit further, we're now joined by Dr. Cynthia McKinney, who is a former U.S. Congresswoman, and she's joining us from the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka. She is an assistant professor at North-South University. And we're also joined by Mr. Nader Talibzadeh, who is an Iranian researcher, and he is joining us from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Thank you both for joining us. Cynthia, if I may, I'd like to start with you and get your thoughts as you heard about Marzieh's detention.
I was absolutely dumbfounded. I was just stunned beyond belief that something like this could happen. The United States to detain her, she's a journalist. She has, for her, what is a dream job. We all look up to her. We respect her so much. She's able to give voice to the pro-peace, pro-justice activists inside the United States. And for something like this to happen, it just has us all very much on edge.
Okay, and before going to you, Nader, I just wanted to play a clip of the Press TV CEO's reaction to Marzieh's detention. Let's quickly watch that clip and then I'll come to you, Nader.
Ms. Hashemi is an outspoken critic of the U.S. government and its regional allies. I would like to express my strong protest at her apprehension and violent treatment. She is yet to be given any reason for her imprisonment. Her feeble health condition necessitates urgent medical attention. The U.S. government is accountable for any potential harm that might affect her mental or physical condition. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of Ms. Hashemi and for the U.S. government to apologize to both the journalists and the international media community for her harsh treatment. Journalism is not a crime, yet the principles of free speech and a free press are still threatened in the United States.
Well, now there we had Peyman Jebeli, the CEO of Press TV, speaking. What do you make of the reactions that have come in Nader, and of course concerns about what kind of a message this sends to other journalists in the United States?
Yes, I think the detainment of Marzieh Hashemi is a clear message. It's a new step during this administration, which by itself is a center of havoc. They come up with new ideas and new movements, new actions that, frankly, just everyone is surprised. It stuns everyone. I think the act by itself is an act of intimidation and provocation. I don't think it's a very simple and uncomplex plan. I think it is an act to intimidate Iran, to provoke Iran, and I think it goes deeper than what we imagine. I think it's a planned concoction by the neocons in the government. Marzieh Hashemi is not unknown. She's a well-known journalist who has spoken to a lot of wise intellectuals in the U.S. and the world. And she's very well known, as you see in Press TV, with the kind of people that come up and talk about her in the past 2 days. So I think this was made to provoke a reaction, and already we stayed silent for 3 days, but since yesterday morning, the news has come out, and it's been a storm. All those who know her know that she's only a journalist. She has never done anything clandestine. She is very transparent. She's also a believing person in her religion and has an audience inside of Iran. A lot of people listen to her speeches weekly for the audience in Iran, besides what she does at Press TV. So she's well known inside and outside of Iran by the elite intellectuals, the anti-war crowd, those who know how the American government has been hijacked. And this is the status, and this will probably increase in tempo.
Okay, so Cynthia, again, the facts aren't there that this is an American journalist who, as Nader there said, has never done anything clandestinely. She's supported and she's spoken out in favor, for example, of the Black Lives Matter movement and what that represents as a whole for African Americans in the United States. She's spoken out about other U.S. policies, of course, criticizing them. All of that should be protected, though, shouldn't it, Cynthia, under what the U.S. claims is its morals of press freedom and freedom of speech. Why hasn't that been upheld, do you think, in the case of Marzieh and other such journalists?
Well, you can look at the track record that the United States has with journalists and journalism, period, so that journalists were an endangered species when the United States was busy bombing in Iraq. So we know that the United States really doesn't have any respect for journalists that are independent and that are truth-telling and truth-seeking. We understand that. But this goes beyond the pale. She is, as you say, a U.S. citizen who is protected by the Constitution. But unfortunately, the sad fact that too many people don't really understand in the United States is that we are saddled with the kind of leadership and people in positional authority who really don't care about the Constitution and its protections. They don't care about civil liberties and protecting the civil liberties of the people and the residents of the United States. And so you end up with a situation where a journalist is under direct threat from the United States government. But she's not the only one. Let's also recognize that we've got Julian Assange, who is a journalist who has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in the United Kingdom for longer than John F. Kennedy was president. Why? Because he told the truth about certain things that the United States government did not want known.
And that rather comes to the heart of the issue, doesn't it, about the truth. Do you think the United States wants to stem this flow of the truth by any journalist within its borders or beyond?
Ms. Cynthia McKinney said it's exactly true, and she said it was with great depth about the others that have the same plight. But the second thing is Iran. Iran is in the crosshairs of the neocon hawks, and they're serious about it. I mean, why would this thing happen just after Bolton and Pompeo went to 9 capitals in the region and not so successful? It triples that. And right after that, I mean, they've been probably pursuing the right time to detain her. And this is, I think, what they do. It's also the point is also Iran. Iran is always in the crosshairs. It's always in one way or another intimidated. Just a day ago, Netanyahu was threatening Iran again, and of course got some reaction from Iranian generals.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously, Marzieh is detained, and not an ordinary person. She was not a low-profile person. She was pretty high-profile. A lot of people know her. I mean, we've been having conferences in Tehran where she has been, in many of the conferences, she's been the host, besides the programs she's had on Press TV, where she has been in link with a lot of top intellectuals in America, those who don't usually have a time. They're not allocated the time to speak in the mainstream media, but in the alternative media, they're stars and luminaries. And she's been in touch with them for over a decade. They know her very well. I mean, it's also a stupid move by the neocons, and they do stupid things, and they think they can get away with it. And to grab and jail a person who is well known. I mean, I've been watching the interviews by different people. Yesterday I was watching Rodney Shakespeare from London and Kevin Barrett from Wisconsin and so on. And so it just goes on. People like Cynthia, who know her very well for a long time and knows how intimate and how serious and how sincere she is. So by touching on this subject and trying to detain her, they're asking for a fight, and they're picking a fight. I think this is exactly one of the scenarios which I think we still don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in the court, but I think it is a neocon concoction.
What do you make of the fact that in this case, charges have not been brought forth yet? Why isn't there clarity, at least on the part of the U.S. judicial system about what's going on here?
Well, that's a good question. The fact that they've been walking so vaguely, and there's a big enigma. I think this is the status of the administration too. They do things, and then when they do it, it goes to a stage of schizophrenia. There are two poles in the government, and this confusion. But I think it will become clear. I think they got a very clear message since yesterday morning when the news splashed out, and they saw the support that she's getting, not from Iran. Note that it's a worldwide support she's getting, and this is there's an avalanche of pressure. I don't think they can get away from that easily. Either if they want to detain her longer for any excuse, or press some charges. Also, they're wide open for her to retaliate and sue them. I think that what they've done already is enough reasons for a pretty good case in the court and the way they have treated her. I mean, my God, this. Giving her the wrong food deliberately, taking off her hijab. What is this, the medieval ages? This is exactly, and I think it's deliberate. They want to say that, yes, we can do it, we can get away with it. Okay. This is who we are. Okay, so as I said before, I think they're picking for propagation, and we should just pursue this case step by step. You're talking with me from Pakistan. Others are talking from other parts of the world. People are tired, and this is a pretty sensitive year. I think it's a pretty full of havoc year, and I think this detainment of someone like that who has such intimate and passionate support from people worldwide, I think is a game changer. It could be a game changer along with the other things that are also simultaneously happening.
And just talk once again about the fact that, it's not lost, I think, upon us that Marzieh Hashemi is an African-American. And of course, she has brought forth, the issues that African-Americans face within U.S. borders. How important a factor do you believe that is in this case?
I think it also plays in the fact that she is African-American. She's been a very good emissary in Iran of African-Americans. She's like the lone American who's been believing personality of what has happened in 1979 in Iran, and also not only American, also an African American. And she's blended in beautifully. Just an hour ago, her Iranian family called me from her late husband's side, and they wanted to have a session tomorrow, late in the afternoon on Friday, so we can discuss the issue and see what they can, how they can help, etc. I mean, she is the part of the different aspects of Marzieh Hashemi make her also very interesting. She's been in my weekly show on Iranian national television several times, and she talked about her detainment last year in the U.S. on different issues, and people know her very well. The African American aspect of her is also, as you mentioned, extremely important, because just last year she went to Michael Brown's house in Ferguson.
Yes.
She covered that issue. Also last year in Arba'in in Iraq, we had a delegation of African Americans, especially Nation of Islam, who came, and she was there, and she sort of merged in. Also, Cynthia McKinney was there.
Nader, I'm going to interrupt you, just do apologize, but we just have about a few minutes left, so I wanted, if you allow me, give the final word to Cynthia. Cynthia, I believe we still have your connection with you, so I wanted to give you the final word. Cynthia, you have, as you said, traveled within the U.S. with Marzieh. Tell us about the importance of the fact that she has spoken so much about African American issues within the United States. How important a factor do you believe that is?
Well, I think it is definitely a factor, but she not only speaks about the African American condition inside the United States. Marzieh is a global personality. And so therefore she is knowledgeable, she is a truth teller, a truth seeker, and this gives every one of us pause now, because if they can do it to her, they can do it to any one of us.
Very well. We'll leave that as a word, but of course we appreciate both of your insights and comments here on this very important topic. That was Dr. Cynthia McKinney, former U.S. Congresswoman, speaking to us from Dhaka, and we were also joined by Mr. Nader Talibzadeh, Iranian researcher, speaking to us from Tehran. Now, viewers, of course, this is an important case, politically charged, of course, as well as the Iranian foreign minister there said, is calling it an unacceptable political act, in fact, that tramples on the freedom of speech. That Mohammad Javad Zarif had put out that statement. We earlier heard from the Press TV CEO as well. There have been other statements as well about this specific case, but as Cynthia said, this is not the only such case. We can also talk about Julian Assange, for example, being kept at the Ecuadorian embassy there in the UK for his own safety, really, because the US is after him as well. What message really is the US sending to journalists around the world, its own journalists or other journalists, such as us speaking here from Pakistan? We'll keep a close eye on this case and other such cases here in The Scope. Thanks for watching. I've been Waqar Rizvi.